He had always seen himself a certain way. Maybe you know this man too, or maybe, in some ways, you are him. Strong, independent, focused. He believed he was in control of his emotions, always leading, never needing. Relationships were a convenience, not a calling. Intimacy was something to manage, not something to surrender to. In the mirror, he saw someone composed, reliable. Someone who didn't lose himself in love, who didn't crave validation. He built a story around strength, not vulnerability. And for a long time, it worked. Life moved forward. Achievements, roles, attention, all served to reinforce the image. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And that's what was happening here. This man lived by patterns he didn't question. He confused control with clarity. He mistook emotional distance for maturity. Maybe you've met someone like this, or maybe you've dated him. The one who seems present but never truly connects, who says all the right things but remains untouched, who offers stability but not depth. That man is not cold. He is simply surviving inside an identity that never invited him to feel. You see, from an early age, many men are taught to wear masks. Be strong. Don't cry. Don't need. Don't show too much. The cost of tenderness becomes too high, and so they bury it. Beneath ambition, beneath logic, beneath silence. Jung called this the persona, the mask we wear to adapt to the world. And when we believe that mask is who we are, we lose touch with what lives behind it. This man wore his mask well. So well, in fact, that even he forgot it was a mask. But life has its ways. The soul, even when silenced, remembers. And sooner or later, something happens. A crack appears, not loudly, not all at once, but quietly, insistently. A subtle shift, a pause, a presence he cannot categorize, and everything he thought he knew about himself begins to tremble. But before the awakening comes, the dissonance. And that's where we find him now, comfortably numb, unaware that his comfort is the very thing keeping him asleep. Have you ever held onto an image of yourself so tightly that you forgot who you really were? When someone mirrors what you've denied, the mask slips, and nothing is the same again. She didn't arrive like the others. There was no chase, no strategy, no attempt to impress. Her presence didn't beg for attention. It commanded it through quietness. She didn't ask to be seen. She simply was. And in that being, something in him began to shift. Perhaps you've met a woman like her, or perhaps you've been her, the one who doesn't fit into traditional roles, who doesn't engage in power games, who walks with calm and speaks with presence. She doesn't try to win love. She doesn't mold herself to be chosen, because she already knows her worth, and she won't betray herself to prove it. Carl Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And that's exactly what she embodied. Authenticity, not as a concept, but as her natural state. She wasn't there to teach him. She wasn't trying to heal him. She simply lived in a way that made him question why he couldn't do the same. He didn't know what to do with her energy. She didn't need him, but she still chose to be near him until she didn't. There was no dependency, no demand, no control. And that disarmed him, because most of his relationships were built on need. He was used to being the provider of emotional direction, the center of someone's orbit. But she had her own gravity, and she wouldn't abandon it to revolve around his. At first, he thought it was mystery. Then, maybe pride. But it wasn't either. It was peace, a kind of inner alignment that didn't seek to dominate or impress. And in her presence, he felt something unfamiliar, not power, not lust, but a quiet discomfort, because her freedom revealed the absence of his own. She wasn't louder, she wasn't colder, she was simply clear. And when someone clear meets someone hiding behind illusions, the illusions begin to tremble. To a man who has spent his life performing strength, real strength feels threatening. To a man who has mistaken love for control, love that asks nothing can feel like rejection. And that's the paradox. What she gave wasn't absence, it was space. What she offered wasn't challenge, it was clarity. If you're watching this and feel a strange recognition in your chest, you're not alone. Because she represents something rare, a kind of feminine presence that doesn't seek to fix or follow. She lives aligned, and alignment cannot be seduced. She didn't need to walk away loudly. She didn't need to explain her standards. Her existence was the explanation. And in that, she didn't just break a pattern. She mirrored his deepest lack. And that is how real transformation begins. There was no final conversation, no accusations, no tears, no raised voice, no pleas to stay. Just silence. A silence so deep it echoed. And in that echo, he heard more than any words could have ever said. You see, we are conditioned to expect closure through drama. We wait for a scene, a confrontation, something tangible that helps us wrap things up neatly. But sometimes, the most profound goodbyes are the quietest. And hers, it was that kind of goodbye. At first, he didn't realize she had gone. Not truly. Her physical absence registered, but it took time for the depth of her departure to sink in. There were no blocked numbers, no social media hints, no parting gifts, just space, clean and sacred. And in that space, something began to break open. Carl Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Her absence was that mirror, forcing him to look where he had never dared before. Not at her, but at himself. Not at what she had done, but at what he had always avoided. Because her silence wasn't passive. It wasn't indifference. It was intelligence. It was self-respect. And it was love, not for him, but for herself. You might wonder, how can silence feel so loud? Why does the absence of a voice hurt more than the harshest words? It's because silence leaves room for reflection. It doesn't distract, it doesn't entertain, it just is, and forces you to sit with everything you've ignored. In her leaving, she did not try to make him feel guilty. She did not try to prove a point, and that's what made it unforgettable. She exited not as punishment, but as permission. Permission for both of them to be honest. At first, he tried to distract himself. He reached for the usual comforts: work, attention, validation, maybe even another woman. But none of it filled the space she had left. Not because of who she was, but because of what she represented. Her silence was not a game. It was a boundary. And boundaries, when they're set with love instead of resentment, feel different. They don't slap, they settle. They don't burn, they illuminate. This is the moment many people resist. The pause after the connection ends and before the healing begins. It's a liminal space, a crack in the surface of the self. And in that crack, light begins to enter. Carl Jung also said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." And that's the truth he now lived. Her absence was the spark that lit the path toward his own shadow, toward all the parts he had buried beneath charm, ambition, detachment. You, watching this, may know that space well. The silence after someone leaves, without drama. That heavy, holy emptiness. It's easy to call it cold. Easy to label it avoidance. But often, It's neither. It's clarity, and clarity is rarely loud. He began to realize that her departure wasn't about abandonment. It was about alignment. She couldn't stay in a place that required her to shrink, to explain, to wait. Her leaving wasn't escape. It was truth in motion. And so, for the first time, he was left not with blame, but with questions. Not about her, but about himself. Why had her silence unsettled him more than any fight? What did her absence stir that presence never could? What part of him had clung to her not from love, but from fear? The silence she left behind wasn't emptiness. It was an invitation, a call inward. At first it felt like falling, not the romantic kind, but the kind where the ground disappears and you have no idea who you are without the image you've always protected. This is the moment most avoid, the confrontation not with another, but with the self. Carl Jung once said, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." And now, finally, he had no choice but to look within. With her gone, all distractions lost their taste. The usual rhythm of his life, control, success, charisma, felt empty, like a well-worn suit that no longer fit. Something had cracked open, and in that crack, something unfamiliar began to grow. He started noticing things he'd never paid attention to. The way he avoided stillness, how he filled silence with noise, how affection for him had often been a performance rather than a presence. For the first time, he wasn't trying to be impressive. He was trying to be honest. You see, true self-reflection isn't glamorous. It doesn't happen in sunlight. It happens in the quiet hours, when the world isn't watching. It's messy, it's humbling, and it's necessary. He began to revisit old memories, not with nostalgia, but with curiosity. Past relationships, moments of shame, unmet needs, they all resurfaced. And for once, he didn't run from them, because now he saw what had always been beneath the surface. A boy who had been taught to be strong, but never safe. A man who learned to lead others emotionally, but never learned how to be held. Carl Jung spoke of the shadow, the unconscious part of the self we hide, suppress, reject. And slowly, that shadow was coming into the light, not to be judged, but to be understood. Because healing doesn't mean becoming someone new. It means remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. And you, watching this, maybe you felt that too. That quiet moment when you realize the fight isn't with others, but with the parts of yourself you never dared to meet. That maybe all the running, all the seeking, all the noise was just a way to avoid this silence. Now he understood. Her departure didn't leave a hole. It revealed one that had always been there. He began to journal, to breathe, to walk slowly instead of rushing. He read books not to appear wise, but to understand. And in those quiet moments, clarity emerged, not as a revelation, but as a remembering. He saw how often he had mistaken validation for love, how often he had performed rather than connected, and how her presence, calm, clear, unbending, had triggered something deeper than desire. It had triggered the call to return home, to himself. Carl Jung once wrote, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart." And that is what was happening now. The man he thought he was, invulnerable, composed, always in control, was dissolving. And beneath that shell was something softer, more real, not weaker, just human. He no longer needed to chase her memory. He no longer tried to decode her silence, because now he understood. It was never about her. It was about what she mirrored. She was the doorway, not the destination. This was the beginning of something irreversible, a kind of awakening that doesn't look dramatic from the outside, but transforms everything within. He no longer feared his own depth, he welcomed it. And you, who may be walking this path too, know this. The pain you feel isn't a punishment. It's a portal. The discomfort is not the end. It's the beginning of truth, of integration, of coming home to yourself. Because once the noise fades and the masks fall away, what's left is not emptiness. It's the self, raw, honest, whole. There comes a moment when everything inside shifts. Not loudly, not dramatically, but undeniably. A quiet threshold is crossed. The man who once clung to control begins to surrender, not to another, but to himself. This is the turning point, the space between who he was and who he is becoming. It doesn't feel like victory. It feels like release, like finally exhaling after years of holding his breath. Carl Jung said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." And now he understood. Awakening wasn't a burst of light. It was sitting in the dark long enough to recognize the outline of his own soul. He no longer wanted to numb the ache. He stopped seeking distractions. He wasn't trying to be loved. He was learning how to love, truly, starting with himself. And you, watching this, maybe you've been there too. That moment where you realize nothing outside you can fix what you haven't faced within. That no one else's presence can replace your absence from yourself. What changed wasn't the world. It was how he saw it. The need for validation, for attention, for being chosen. It began to dissolve. Not because he had conquered it, but because he had looked it in the eye. He began to see love not as possession, not as emotional management, but as freedom, as presence, as stillness. He understood now why her silence had shaken him. It wasn't rejection. It was a mirror, showing him all the places where he had yet to stand still in his own truth. Carl Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." And this moment, this quiet rupture, was where fate turned into choice. He stopped blaming her, stopped idealizing the memory, stopped trying to decode the past. Because now he knew she hadn't broken him. She had revealed the fractures that were already there. And instead of patching them quickly, he sat with them. He let them breathe. He let them teach him. He found beauty in the slowness. He wasn't rushing to become a new man. He was unlearning the old one, the one who needed to lead every interaction, the one who feared vulnerability, the one who mistook attachment for intimacy. Now, every breath felt different, more grounded, more real. He didn't need to perform anymore. He didn't need to be needed. He needed to be present. And you, if you've ever felt like your world was falling apart, maybe it was really falling into place. Maybe your soul was asking you to stop performing and start listening. Not to others, to yourself. The turning point doesn't look like much from the outside, but inside it is revolution. It is the moment when silence becomes a friend, not a threat. When solitude becomes a teacher, not a punishment. He had spent so long searching for a woman to soothe him, to prove he was worthy. And now, without realizing it, he had become the one he was waiting for. He didn't need to be chosen anymore. He had finally chosen himself. Carl Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And now, this man was beginning to understand what that meant, not as a philosophy, but as lived truth. The turning point is not the end of the journey. It's the moment you begin walking with different eyes, different steps, a different heart. And in that stillness, a soft clarity arrives. Time has passed. The ache has softened. The obsession has dissolved. And now what remains is not longing, but light. She no longer appears in his thoughts with sharp edges. Her memory no longer wounds, it illuminates. Because what he once perceived as loss, he now sees as initiation. She was never his to keep. She was his mirror, his catalyst, his quiet revolution. Carl Jung said, "A woman, in the symbolic sense, represents the unconscious." And indeed, she had become the symbol of everything he had not yet integrated. Stillness, autonomy, presence, freedom. Not the kind of freedom that runs, but the kind that stays rooted in self-respect. And you, yes, you watching this, maybe you too have left quietly once. Maybe you've been misunderstood, labeled cold, distant, or too independent. But hear this. When you choose peace over performance, when you walk away from what doesn't honor your soul, your absence becomes your power. He sees that now. She didn't owe him a dramatic exit. She didn't owe him explanations. She was never trying to teach him a lesson. She was simply being true to herself. But in doing so, she planted a seed. And now that seed has grown into something irreversible. Not a need to reclaim her, but a need to reclaim himself. She was the spark, but the fire was always his to tend. And in that fire, he has forged a new self. Less performative, more present. Less entitled, more open. Less in control, more connected. Jung wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." And yes, she transformed him, not by staying, but by being herself fully and refusing to stay half-loved. This kind of woman is not remembered with bitterness. She is remembered with reverence, because what she gave was not her body, not even her time. She gave reflection. A reflection of what was missing, of what was waiting to be seen. He no longer searches for her in other faces. He doesn't chase the memory in the arms of replacements. He's no longer looking for someone to finish what she started. Because now he understands. What she awakened was not desire. It was awareness. And that awareness has matured. Now he looks at life differently. He approaches connection with care, not conquest. He listens more deeply. He speaks with more truth. And most of all, he loves without needing to possess. To the woman who once thought she left unnoticed, let this be known. You were seen. Not in the way society teaches men to see, with eyes of conquest or need, but with the eyes of the soul, in the stillness after your leaving. Your way of loving, autonomous, dignified, honest, left an imprint, not on his ego, on his evolution. And to the man watching this, maybe you've walked this path too. Maybe you were changed by someone who never tried to change you. Someone who simply existed so fully that their absence echoed into your awakening. If so, know this. It was never about returning to them. It was about returning to yourself. Jung reminds us, what we accept in ourselves transforms us. And he has accepted it now. The longing, the pain, the growth. He sees now that what he feared losing was never her. It was the illusion of himself he once clung to. Now he stands not as the man who needs to be needed, but as the man who can love without losing himself. Because what she left behind was not emptiness. It was direction, a trace of light pointing inward. And in following that light, he found not her, but himself. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new stories that speak to the soul. Turn on notifications and let each new episode be a step toward yourself.